Hello and welcome to the Our Prenup Lawyer podcast, where you and I get to learn more about prenups as I interview professionals from the fields of family law, couples counseling, and wealth management. I'm your host, Libby Garabedian. Let's get started. The information provided in this podcast is prepared by Our Prenup Lawyer for informational purposes only and does not constitute legal advice. The information is not intended to create an attorney-client relationship. This is not legal advice or a substitute for obtaining legal advice from an attorney. A person listening or watching should not rely upon it in any manner without engaging professional counsel. The podcast is intended to communicate general information and, because recorded, may not be current. On this episode of Our Prenup Lawyer, I'm joined by Renée Bauer. Renée is a trailblazing family law attorney, award-winning author, and sought-after speaker who has redefined how people think about divorce and reinvention. As the founder and managing attorney at Happy Even After Family Law, she empowers clients to move forward with confidence, handling complex, high-asset cases with precision and compassion. A frequent media commentator and legal educator, Renée is also the best-selling author of She Who Wins, Divorce in Connecticut, and several other acclaimed works that inspire personal and professional growth. Her top-ranked podcast and national speaking engagements showcase her bold message that divorce is not an ending, but an opportunity for transformation. Beyond the courtroom, she's an innovator, founding parent Copilot, the first AI-powered co-parenting app for navigating high-conflict relationships. When she's not advocating, writing, or speaking, Renée channels her energy into fitness, creative writing, and enjoying life's next chapter as an empty nester. Welcome, Renée.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. Let's go ahead and get started. I want to ask you how you got started in family law.
Not by intention. It was really by accident. So I worked right out of law school. I worked for a small solo practitioner. It was him and his son, and they were well-known criminal defense lawyers in the state. And when they brought me on, they had a general practice that did a lot of other things, but really their focus and their love was criminal defense. And so they dumped all their family cases on me because they didn't want to do them. And as I started to get my feet wet into that world, I realized, I can have an impact beyond the law, because it was so much more than just applying the law. Like there's social work behind it. There's mindset work. There's really helping people move beyond what might be one of the most difficult times in their life. And then I found myself divorced, and then the work became even that much more important to me because I've lived it as well personally.
How do you feel that your experiences have informed your practice since then?
So I think that when someone comes to me and they're so distraught and they think that this is the worst thing that's ever happened to them, I can say, listen, yeah, I get it. It's probably feels like the worst time in your life. It probably feels like nothing is ever going to feel good again. It probably feels like you're never going to find happiness again. But that's not the truth. That's not what the other side looks like. And I used to not share my own personal story because I used to feel like it was unprofessional. And I realized that I was doing a disservice to clients. So I have no problem now sharing my own experiences of being divorced, being on my own, being a single mom, missing my son, and it's that level of empathy to say, yes, we can talk about the law and the numbers and all of that's important, but let's also talk about how you're doing. So I think that my practice has become much more holistic than just doing the job. Where when I originally started, it was very much in a box. And now I look at each case and each situation a little bit differently, because I look at what life looks like on the other side and try to approach each case with that in mind, and helping people not just to sign that divorce agreement, but really to recreate a life that they never expected at this point.
That's wonderful that you're able to offer that insight and compassion to your clients. Even though you've had to go through it, I'm sure that it really does help them even more.
I hope so. I hope they can at least take some nugget to say, she figured it out, and maybe I can too.
Yeah. So I love the name of your practice, Happy Even After. How does that resonate with your mission?
So, it's funny because the name of my firm has gone through many different versions from when I first started to where I am now. And like most lawyers, you stick your name in the title of it. And I did the same thing. And there were different versions of what the name of that business was. And then I realized that the business isn't about me. And as we grew and we scaled, that the practice really isn't just about one person. And I wanted to create what I thought people wanted on the other side of their divorce. And it had nothing to do with the single person who was the business owner. And it really had to do with what did they hope to get on the other side of this ultimate plot twist. And everyone wants to be happy. I mean, it's as simple as that, is everyone wants to have joy and be happy. And then I thought of like that saying, living happily ever after. And I'm like, well, what happens if it's not the ever after? What happens even after like the ultimate plot twist? And decided to remove my name from it. That was a business decision and a marketing decision. And create a name that stood out in a very saturated market of lawyers throwing their names on their signs and on their as just as a marketing tactic of like, how do you stand out in a street of all lawyers? And it's really funny because I love marketing stuff and I love all of that stuff, which isn't what your podcast is about. But the feedback I got when I changed the name was so interesting because I had like the old time lawyers who were like, that's the dumbest name ever. And we have clients who call every single day who said, I called you because I love the name of your firm and that's what I want.
That's amazing. That is such a great marketing tactic. And I'm sure it does really catch people's attention because divorce isn't the end all be all. There's something after it too.
Right, right. So long as you make sure that it's not the end of your story. Like we have clients too, like they're the ones that go back to court over and over and over again. They're the ones we see again. They're the ones who keep filing post-judgment motions because they haven't been able to kind of wrap their head around that this is not the sum of their existence. And it's that if we can help a client get divorced and never see them again, I think that that's a success story. And then they never have to go back to court again. And ultimately, that's what the goal is. It's to not keep people embroiled in the conflict and the chaos.
Now, I'm thinking about your philosophy on divorce. I want to talk about your book really quickly. She Who Wins. Tell me about Stop, Drop, and Roll.
Okay, so it's that came by accident. So I realized, so I'm a writer through and through. I've been a writer since I was a kid. That I didn't write the books for the business. I wrote the book because I'm a writer and I'm a creative. So when I got the book deal, I wanted to traditionally publish a book. And when I got that, I realized I need to give people something like a takeaway. And it's what is the thing that I have used as a tool for whenever I found myself facing fear or doubt or imposter syndrome. And then I was like, I'd walk myself through certain steps. And then I realized I'm doing the same thing through clients. But how do I sum that up? Like, how do I say it in a way that's really memorable? And as I was actually on a walk with my husband and I was starting to tell people to like really get to the root of what is it that you really want. What is it is it your heart that's calling you? Is it your head that's calling you out? And usually it's like our head that's trying to keep us safe. And I usually help clients determine what's keeping them from moving forward or filing for the divorce that they know that they want. And that's the stop part of it. It's stopping and assessing what it is you actually want. And then the next part is once you realize what it is you want, what are the excuses holding you back? And we all have them. It's fear. It's I'll do it later when I have more money, when the kids are older, when I lose weight. Like it's all of those excuses that hold most people back, regardless if it's relationships or starting the business or going for whatever it is that you want. And once you identify those excuses, they don't have to hold you back anymore. And then the next piece of it is the most important one, and it's taking action. So that's the stop, the drop, and the rolling into action, and then letting things fall into place because what we think we want may not always be what's best for us, but having some trust and some faith that things are going to work out exactly the way it's supposed to be. So if you stop, you drop and you roll, you're always going to win because you're not staying stuck in complacency. You're not staying stagnant, you're moving forward and sometimes letting, I don't know, is it the universe? Is it, whatever you want to call it, but it's letting sometimes things take on a life of its own and allowing things to, like, you're releasing that control and allowing things to fall into place. And more times than not, when we do that, we look back and say, wow, like I didn't even know that I wanted that or needed that. And it's amazing how that magically worked out. And that can go for my clients who are getting divorced. That could go to the person who got fired from their job and they thought it was the worst thing that ever happened to them. Or the person who really wanted to start a business and didn't know how to do it and had fear of not having enough or failing. So it really applies to any area of your life. And that became the backbone of the book.
That's amazing and such a great perspective. And like you said, a wonderful mindset to have in any situation to really enable yourself to move forward and progress.
Yeah, and that was so I wanted to give the readers something that they could remember and take away. And it's funny because there's been a couple times since that book came out where I've had to like slap myself in the face with my own words and I've been stuck and I'll be like, shoot, I have to like walk the walk that I'm talking, and I will bring myself through that. And it's so easy. Like you could be on a walk, you could be taking a shower and you can walk through that. And so part of the book is a lot of stories about my own failings, and some of them humorous and some not, and really bringing people on a journey of like hoping that they can see themselves a little bit in the stories that I tell and the failings and all of the things that I feel like I've gone through, that they're just my stories, but everyone else has their own version of that.
That's wonderful. Now I want to shift back to your practice and talking about some of the services you offer. Let's talk about high asset divorce. How is high asset divorce different from a typical divorce without substantial wealth or complex assets?
Yeah. So usually the client itself is the difference. So with a high asset divorce, and depending on that level of notoriety that they may or may not have, usually you have a client that requires a lot more of your time and attention. And they've gotten to the place where they are because they've had people cater to their needs or get things done quickly. So you're operating with a client who expects results and wants communication and doesn't want to go weeks without hearing from you if they've reached out. So there's a level of hand holding that is elevated beyond kind of a typical level divorce. But then it comes down to the numbers, and it comes down to the number of experts you might need. So usually in some sort of high asset, there's going to be some level of experts in terms of a forensic accountant, perhaps to untangle what someone's income is, perhaps to value some of the assets. If there's executive compensation packets, we usually bring somebody in so that we really understand what it is that they have as part of their income, as part of their package. So where let's just say a regular run-of-the-mill divorce, you may not bring in any experts. When you have that high level, you're going to create a whole team of people who become the part of your sounding board as the lawyer to make sure we're not missing anything. So often like an estate planning attorney to make sure that all of the trusts that were written are set up in a way that doesn't impact the divorce, or they are protected, the assets in there are protected. So we're always looking at the whole situation and saying who are we going to potentially need to step foot in a courtroom if it comes to that, in order to testify as to what the level is. And of course, high asset divorce means the divorce is more expensive because you're bringing all of these people in. You have a higher level of attention to detail that's needed to really understand what it is that these clients have. And that becomes much more expensive for the clients because it's much more manpower or woman power needed as the case progresses.
So how are high asset divorces similar to divorces for business owners?
Yeah, so it's the business owners require a different level of examining the finances. It's one thing if you're W-2, it becomes very simple. You get somebody's tax statement and we know what their income is, And we don't have to then really dig into the finances to determine if their income matches up to their tax return, to matches up to what they're reporting, and all of the profit and loss and all of that. But when you have a business, it becomes different because so let's say, for example, you have a business owner who pays their cell phone and their car, and they pay some Walmart runs through there. And now we're just talking like a small business. There's a lot of expenses that can run through the business, and the IRS tax code allows you to do that. But that doesn't mean that that's not income to that person. So when we're really looking at what does this person have to live, if we're trying to determine what alimony is or child support is, we need to know what is that person's income actually looks like. Because just because the profit and loss says that the net profit is something, that doesn't mean that that's what they actually have to live off of, because maybe 50% of their expenses are being paid through the business in some way. So we're bringing in an expert to value the business. If it's a one person, one man shop, we might not value the business because if they shut it down, the business doesn't exist. If you have 100-person business, that's a different story. We're going to need to put a value on that, because that business probably will be able to operate without that client or the spouse in there. So we're always making that determination of what level do we need someone to dig into the books and really uncover what the profit looks like and the margins look like, and that value of the business. And if there's partnerships, that adds a layer of complexity as well.
Now, what if a spouse is trying to hide income or assets through their business to reduce the amount of alimony or child support they need to pay?
So common. And that's why we bring in forensic accountants. It is very common for someone to do that. And that's why when you have a forensic accountant in the books, they will recreate what that person's income looks like by adding back in all of those expenses. So even if someone goes to sell a business, for example, a lot of times you'll see the value of the business. They're looking at the margins, and they're looking at the profit. Well, now you're adding back in all those things that the owner was taking from the business or paying through the business that no longer will happen because they're not there. So you have to, if I have a car payment, as if I was a non-business owner and I'm paying that myself, well, that's less income I have available to me. Then why would we not add that back in? If you have a business owner who's paying their vehicle through the business, we have to look at the other person shouldn't get less support or less child support because their bottom line is less, just because those expenses are coming off the top. So now we need to figure out what has to get layered back in. Most lawyers aren't going to do that. I'm not the expert. I can look at things to a certain extent, like if businesses look, if there's a certain level of business, a certain income level, certain size, it's easy enough for me to look at the numbers and work with that. But the bigger the business gets, the more profitable the business gets, the more likely you're going to want an expert who comes in and puts all of those numbers together, and then will help you attempt to negotiate a settlement based on what they find, or will testify as your expert if the case goes to trial.
So that's where you bring in additional team members to offer support and their expertise.
Right. And it's so important for the lawyer to recognize who those people are that you need on that team. And it's dangerous when a lawyer thinks that they know everything, because we don't. And it's really important you have someone that says, okay, I have team members that I can call up and say, I really need a trust attorney to help the judge understand what all of these complex trusts say and mean. The judge isn't going to understand it. Most regular family lawyers are not going to understand it, but you have someone who dedicates their whole life to creating trusts. They're going to be able to explain them and the nuances of it in a way that's really important, because we can't trust the court just to understand it, because we can't just give them a document and say, here's 200-page trust. Now you figure it out. Like, that's our job, is to help the court figure it out so they know what to do with it. And that's all about having that support team in that case.
So in thinking about estate planning, when is the best time, whether it's before your divorce or while you're going through it, if you haven't prepared, to start planning your future and make sure that you have all your finances in order?
Yeah, great question. If you haven't done it, you're late to the game. So it's always it's listen, better late than never. But what you don't want to do is start to create trusts and put your assets into these trusts and then file for divorce 3 months later, because it becomes very clear what somebody did, and the chances of that trust being pierced is probably high, because it's a strategic move to prevent your spouse from gaining any of the assets. But any sort of estate planning, I mean, this should be something that anyone's thinking about no matter what, whether they're on the cusp of divorce or not. You should be thinking about how you want to protect your assets. And the tax code is always changing. It's very complex as to the mechanisms you can do to protect assets, and especially when you have generational wealth. That's something that hopefully the generations before had set those up for you. But I can't state enough that you should be going to someone not who doesn't just do wills, who really knows and understands full complex estate planning. You don't want someone to just throw a will together and drop the word trust in that thing and hope it stands up. It will not. Like, you really, really need an expert in that regard. So the sooner the better. If anyone's listening and they think that they are someone who may need to set up some level of trust or estates, like, make the call now and start putting that together. Because even if your marriage survives it, it's still something really, really good to have.
So how can prenups be a tool to protect, whether it's a business owner or someone coming into the marriage with generational wealth, or just your average person who doesn't have a lot of high or complex assets? How can prenups be a tool to benefit them in the long run?
I think the value of a prenup is forcing the couple to have conversations about money before it becomes a problem. And a lot of times when we see marriages break down, it's because they haven't had those conversations. Someone's a spender, someone's a saver, somebody came into the marriage with a lot of debt and didn't disclose it. They're not talking about it. So if you could talk about things ahead of time, then you get ahead of that, and everyone has the expectations of what's going to happen in the marriage. That's the best way to avoid the money conflict that we so often see down the road. So a prenup is a tool. So especially if it's a second or third marriage, you're going to want to make sure that whatever you built up during that time before you met your future spouse is protected in a way. If you want, let's say you have kids from a different marriage, you're going to want to make sure that some of your wealth is protected for them, so that if something were to happen to you, it doesn't all just go to your current spouse, and then your children of future or past marriages doesn't get any benefit of that. So those are things that you're going to want to think about. It might be for both sides. You both might come to the marriage with children, and you recognize that you want to preserve some of their inheritance. And so those are the conversations. If you're a business owner, you've put your blood, sweat, tears, and grit into building a business. You don't want your future spouse to come in and say, well, now I want part of that business that I had nothing to do with while you built it. But now that we're getting divorced, I want a piece of it. So you're looking at, no one likes to go into a marriage thinking about all the things that could potentially go wrong. And you want to hope that you sign that prenup and never, ever have to look at it again. But at least there is some transparency about, here's what we're going to do if this doesn't work out, and everyone's on the same page. Now, I have seen a prenup that someone actually put in there that their spouse could not gain more than and I think it might have been more than 30 pounds, except for pregnancy, that she would not maintain a weight over a certain weight. Something like that. I mean, for me, that's a red flag all day long. She ended up marrying that person. I would love to know if they were still married today. But it's not meant for a mechanism to control things like that. It's meant for, it's for the past and what you've accumulated, or if there's generational wealth, like you said, it's to put some guardrails up around that, not to dictate what your spouse is doing or not doing for their physical appearance. But people try to put some interesting things in prenups.
So those clauses would not necessarily be held up when the prenup's being
Yeah,
mitigated.
I mean, I can't imagine any judge would look at that and be like, get on a scale and you broke the clause. Like I can't, I just couldn't imagine like anything like that playing out, or that being grounds to uphold some clause in the prenup that that person gets less because they budged it's mind blowing that was even part of it. But it's really meant to be very black and white in terms of someone is to get, this is how things get divided. You are to get this, you are not to get this. Child support, for example, can never be negotiated in a prenup. Custody can never be negotiated in a prenup for future children. Those are things that are always going to be on the table if the marriage were to break down in the future. So you're not going to be able to sign your rights away to ask for child support or anything like that, because what's in the best interest of the child is all that the court cares about. So while the prenup covers a lot of things, it doesn't necessarily cover everything if you were to find yourself getting divorced.
So aside from child support and custody, what does the divorce process look like for a couple who has a prenup versus one that doesn't?
Yeah, so if neither party is challenging the terms of the prenup, the paperwork would get filed. There would be an agreement that it reflects the terms that are part of that prenup. And it would hopefully be smooth, and it gets filed, the divorce gets granted, and onward you go. Sometimes people challenge prenups. We've seen that where someone might argue that they didn't have review counsel, that they were forced to sign it a couple days before their marriage and they didn't have enough time and they were pressured, which is always why I never suggest signing a prenup within, like, you want to get this, start thinking about this a year before you get married. Don't wait until the week before. You want both of you to have independent counsel reviewing it. So I've seen challenges because there's been one lawyer who reviewed it and the other person didn't have the benefit of the review counsel. I've seen a challenge to a prenup because there was a language barrier where one person signed it but didn't actually even understand what was written on the paper. So if there's a challenge to the prenup, then usually the court will schedule a hearing to argue whether there's a valid grounds to challenging it. And then from there, the court makes the determination that it would get upheld or that the divorce would proceed as if the prenup didn't exist.
Interesting. Okay. Now, before we go, I do want to ask you about your app, Parent Copilot, because it is such a great tool. Can you tell me how you came up with that and how it works?
Yeah, so it was probably about, I don't know, 6 or 8 months ago, I had an old client reach out to me and they sent me an email that their co-parent sent them and said, can you help me write a response to this email? And I was like, and so he ended up paying me to have this back and forth and help him craft the response. I'm like, there has to be a better way rather than him run to a lawyer every time there's an email or a text that comes through that person doesn't like. And so I thought, I'm like, okay. And often we see in courts that judges will recommend co-parent counseling, which is also expensive. And what sometimes a co-parent counselor does is like that buffer between communication. So our co-parent coordinator. So I'm like, what if I can create an app that acts as that co-parent coordinator, but that person has that in their pocket all of the time. So and while there are some tools out there for communication and texting, there wasn't anything out there that actually helped diffuse a high conflict situation. So the app it allows someone to upload their parenting plan, and then it will acknowledge what it says. And so when someone inputs the text or the email that they want help with, it's going to have the information at their fingertips to say, well, you say your son Sam's visitation schedule, looks like this, and how about you suggest this date instead of that? And it gives them some tools in order to help communicate, so that they're not running to professionals every time they hit a bump in the road.
So you're really simplifying the process, but also taking a big strain off of co-parenting.
Well, and that's the goal. And taking some money away from some of the professionals who make money off of some of this conflict, and I think a lot of people do it for the right reason. But it's just, I think if you have to bring in a third party every time there's conflict, it doesn't help. It complicates it. Then you feel like you're trying to pit that person against the other one, or maybe someone's taking sides and there's an expense to it. And I mean, kids don't benefit from that. Kids benefit from their parents communicating well, and at least being civil with each other.
Exactly. Now, from your extensive career and all the ugly divorces you've seen, but also successful marriages, what would you say is key to having a happy or successful marriage?
Don't let things fester. When, I think that a lot of when people say like an affair is the cause of the marriage, more times than not, it wasn't that. It was festering resentment. It was lack of communication where something came up that was bothering the other person and they just swept it under the rug and they didn't they tackle it head on. And when stuff comes up and conflict comes up, a lot of people, and I would say especially women, but I think men too, are people pleasers. And it's easier to just say yes and to get along so that they don't want to deal with the conflict, and that causes resentment. And that then 5 years down the road, they're saying the other side says they were blindsided and they didn't see it coming because the other person wasn't being upfront about what their needs are. So communication is everything. I think it's really helpful for couples to have check-ins, to be like, how are you doing? Is there anything, like, this is a safe space? Is there anything that we need to talk about where no one's going to get defensive or blame the other person, and kind of an open forum to keeping that communication? Because we're all humans, we all bring to the table our past experiences and maybe childhood trauma. And we hope to do better than maybe past generations or our parents. But it's we have some responsibility on that to kind of step up and acknowledge our own role and what that looks like, and be forthcoming about what our needs are. And you hope you have a partner who can be receptive to that and hear and contribute to that. And sometimes you do, and sometimes you don't.
Mm-hmm. So being honest and having those difficult conversations.
Right. Even though they're hard. No one wants to have the hard conversations, but better to have them now than have them across, sitting across the table from a divorce lawyer explaining the reason why your marriage broke down.
Exactly. Yeah. Before it gets to that stage.
Yeah.
Now, if listeners are interested in reaching you, can you tell us your website and what's the best way to contact you?
Yeah, so while I'm a Connecticut divorce lawyer, meaning that I can only take cases in Connecticut, we do have some free guides and resources online for anybody. And you can go to familylawyerct.com, and we have a free divorce workbook, which is like 80 pages, for anyone to start to wrap their head around what they need to do first, start to get organized, start to think about the decisions that they need to make. Anyone can go download that for free.
Excellent. And we'll include that in the show notes so people can get it there. Well, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you for having me.
That's our show, folks. Thank you for listening to Our Prenup Lawyer. Make sure to like and subscribe, and feel free to drop a comment below. Follow us on Instagram at Our Prenup Lawyer, and listen to us on Spotify, iHeart, Apple Podcasts, Audible, and watch us on YouTube. See you guys next time.